I was fired on a Monday morning in front of 12 people by a man who had already signed my termination papers 4 days earlier. He just waited for an audience. Richard Voss slid the notice across the conference table without introduction, without explanation, without even looking at the 41-page report I'd stayed up until 2 a.m. preparing. Then he said one sentence, slowly, loud enough for everyone in that room to hear. "You're finished, Emma, and in this industry, no one will hire you again." I looked at the paper. I looked at him. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I stood up, buttoned my blazer, and walked out. What Voss didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd already seen something they'd all missed. And I was about to bet everything on it. Let me back up. My name is Emma Carter. I'm 31 years old, single mother to a 6-year-old daughter named Sophie. For 2 years, I'd worked at Corway Logistics as a senior analyst. Good at my job. Really good, actually. The kind of good that meant I saw problems before they became disasters and opportunities before they became obvious. That Monday morning, I walked into that conference room thinking I was presenting a corridor expansion analysis. What I was actually walking into was an execution. Voss arrived at 8:03 with 2 executives flanking him. Didn't look at me. Didn't look at my report sitting on the table. Just looked at me the way you look at a problem you've already decided to stop thinking about. He sat down, adjusted his cufflinks, cleared his throat once, then pushed a single sheet of paper across the table. Termination notice. Effective immediately. Signed and dated the previous Thursday. I read it slowly. Not because I didn't understand the words, but because my brain needed those extra seconds to process that this had been decided 4 days ago. Before this morning. Before my report. Before the 8 minutes I'd spent in the hallway rehearsing what I was going to say. The room was silent. Daniel Morgan sat at the far end. CFO, good guy, someone I respected. I watched his hand close around the edge of his folder until his knuckles went white. But he didn't say anything. Nobody did. Then Voss delivered the line, I'll never forget. "You're finished, Emma." And I'll be honest with you. In this industry, no one is going to hire you after this. Not now. Not in 5 years. He said it like a verdict. Final, sealed. I looked at that termination notice one more time, then at him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I folded the paper, placed it inside my report, stood up, grabbed my jacket, and walked out. Packing took less than 30 minutes. 2 years fit into one cardboard box. Stapler, framed photo of Sophie at the beach, a small plant someone had given me as a joke about resilience, and a USB drive with all my backup files. Security escorted me to the elevator with professional politeness. They'd done this before. They'd do it again. I walked out of Corway Logistics with that box under one arm and my phone buzzing in my pocket. I answered without looking. "Mom?" Sophie's small voice. "What are we having for dinner tonight?" "I want the pasta with the round things." I stopped on the sidewalk, adjusted the box. "Tortellini, baby! Yeah, we can do that." The next 3 weeks were brutal. I sent my resume to 6 firms. All 6 came back with variations of the same answer. Position filled. Timing isn't right. We'll keep your information on file. 2 responses came back within 48 hours. Too fast to have actually read my resume. Someone had made calls. Voss had made calls. He hadn't been making a prediction that Monday morning. He'd been announcing a plan already in motion. My savings account had 4 months of rent and groceries, maybe 5 if I stretched everything. Sophie was starting 1st grade in September. The enrollment paperwork sat on my kitchen counter next to a permission slip for a school field trip to a farm. The field trip cost $12. I signed it immediately, then sat at that kitchen table for a long time after Sophie went to bed. I opened my laptop, not to look for jobs, but because sitting in silence made the apartment feel too empty. I had a browser tab open, some listing aggregator for distressed industrial properties I'd used during my Corway days when I studied market gaps like other people do crosswords. I scrolled without purpose. Most of it was the usual. Obsolete plants, flood-damaged facilities, properties that had been relisted for years. Then I saw it. Delray Industrial Park, 4.2 acres, rail infrastructure, heavy load, certified. 31 miles from city center, listed 3 years. Price reduced 4 times. The description was blunt. Remote location, infrastructure needs rehabilitation, not suitable for current distribution models. Something clicked. I pulled up a second window, the Federal Corridor Planning Database I'd bookmarked 2 years earlier during that northern expansion research. Corway had ignored because the timeline was too long. I found the updated projection map. Highway expansions, rail upgrades, infrastructure investments scheduled for the next 4 to 6 years. I put both maps side by side. Delray sat exactly where 2 major planned routes would intersect. In 4 years, maybe 5, that remote location wouldn't be remote anymore. It would be ground zero for the Eastern Corridor expansion. I stared at those maps for a long time. I thought about that 41-page report in my closet, the $12 field trip permission slip, the word finished said in front of 12 people. Then I thought about why a 4.2-acre facility with rail infrastructure had been sitting empty for 3 years. I opened my laptop again. Margaret Cole had spent 32 years in industrial real estate before retiring at 62. I'd met her once at a conference 4 years earlier, saved her contact info under people worth knowing, never used it. I used it now. We met Wednesday morning at a diner downtown. Margaret ordered black coffee, studied the menu, even though she clearly knew what she wanted, and waited. I spread my Delray analysis on the table, location data, corridor projections, timeline, current price. I wasn't asking for money. I was asking for honest assessment. She read in silence, looked at the maps, looked at the projection data, set everything down, and looked at me. Who else has looked at this? Nobody who understood what they were seeing. She picked up her coffee, looked at the papers again, out the window, back at me. You know, the infrastructure rehabilitation alone will eat most of your capital. I know. And the timeline before this becomes what you think it becomes is 3 to 5 years minimum. That's 3 to 5 years of carrying costs, thin margins, and zero guarantee the corridor development happens on schedule. I know that too. She set down her cup, said nothing for a moment. I could hear the diner around us, plates clattering, someone laughing, the coffee machine cycling. Then she made a sound that was almost a laugh. That asking price, she said slowly, is either a gift or a trap, depending on whether you know the difference between a bad location and a location that isn't ready yet. I know the difference. I believe you. She folded her hands on the table. I'll put in as minority partner, enough to cover electrical rehabilitation and 6 months operating reserve. You run everything, she paused. But Emma, if you're wrong about the corridor timeline, this hurts both of us. If I'm wrong, I said, I'll own it. Closing happened on a Friday afternoon. Small notary office, second floor, smelled like old carpet and lemon cleaner. Title transfer, 14 pages. I signed where indicated, initialed where needed, took my time. Sophie sat by the door, feet dangling, drawing on scrap paper. She was sketching a truck with a superhero driver. I capped the pen, looked at my daughter, stood. In the parking lot, she looked up at me. Did you buy the big warehouse, Mom? I bought something people gave up on. We're going to find out if they were right. She thought about this with 6-year-old seriousness. What if they were right? Then I was wrong, but I don't think I was. She nodded, tucked her drawing under her arm, walked to the car. The next 18 months weren't glamorous. They were work, the grinding, invisible kind that has no audience and produces no immediate results. I hired 7 crew members, paid them on time, every time, even during months when doing so meant I slept at the facility office instead of driving home because I needed to save gas money. The crew noticed. They stayed, worked harder than required because I treated their time as valuable. First came electrical, 3 months of rewiring that cost more and took longer than estimated. Then loading dock reinforcement, rail connector inspection and replacement, floor resurfacing. I did what I could myself, contracted what I couldn't. I learned things I'd never needed before, how rail hardware corrodes in humidity, which suppliers delivered reliably, how to read structural engineering reports without help. By month 11, I had 3 tenants, small companies needing affordable regional staging. None were large contracts. Together, they covered operations with thin margin. Not victory, evidence. Month 13, an email from a former Corway colleague mentioning, casually, that Corway had signed their northern expansion and was looking for logistics partners along the eastern corridor. I read it twice, saved it under reference, didn't reply. Went back to Second Bay capacity projections. Margaret visited in month 15. Walked the perimeter silently, inspected everything, stood in the main bay center and slowly rotated, taking inventory. When she came back to where I stood, she was quiet. Then she said, "When we first met, I thought you were reckless." "You did." "I was wrong. You're not reckless. You're just operating on a timeline that makes everyone else uncomfortable." Daniel Morgan, the CFO who'd sat silent in that conference room, had been promoted 8 months after I left. He was good at his job. Precise, thorough, disciplined. When Voss assigned him to evaluate logistics partners for the northern expansion, he approached it systematically. Built a scoring framework, identified 15 candidates, sent teams to assess the top 8. Tuesday afternoon, his assistant placed a revised shortlist on his desk. 4th entry, Del Rey Industrial Hub. Owner-operated, single proprietor, established 22 months. He pulled up my business registration, property records, sat very still, then grabbed his bag and told his assistant he'd conduct the next site visit personally. Thursday morning, he showed up at Del Rey. I was at the north end of the main bay, standing in front of a logistics display, talking with my crew. Flannel shirt, work boots, concrete dust. I looked up when I saw him. Didn't change my expression. "Mr. Morgan, I wasn't expecting a visit." "Intentional. I prefer seeing facilities as they operate, not as they present." "Fair. Where do you want to start?" We walked for 40 minutes. He asked technical questions, load tolerances, rail coordination, electrical backup, tenant protocols. I answered directly. No hesitation, no embellishment. Didn't mention the conference room. Didn't ask what he was really doing there. Treated it as standard professional evaluation. By the end, he'd filled 4 notepad pages. He stood at the exit, checking notes against what he'd seen. "You've built this in under 2 years." 22 months, he nodded once. We shook hands. He walked to his car, sat without starting the engine for almost a minute, then started the car and drove away. 3 days later, he submitted his report to Voss. Del Rey ranked first among 7 finalists. Location, infrastructure, cost efficiency. Friday morning presentation. Voss read until he reached the 4th line where my facility name appeared. His expression didn't dramatically change, just closed, like a door pulled shut. He drew a single line through the Del Rey entry, set the report face down. "Find someone else." Daniel had expected this, but looking at that line through the data he'd gathered, he couldn't just say yes. "The recommendation follows the scoring framework you approved. If there's a specific deficiency, I'd like to address it." Voss looked at him with fake patience. My reason is that I said no. Daniel left the office, sat at his desk, pulled up the corridor map. He understood. Had understood. The moment he walked my facility and saw how the rail connector aligned with planned extensions. I'd bought land worth nearly nothing currently and bet it would be worth considerably more soon. I'd done this after being fired in front of witnesses, after being told I was finished. And I'd been right. He picked up his phone, looked at my number for a long time, then pressed it. I answered immediately. "This may sound unusual," he said, "but your facility might be removed from the Corway shortlist. Not based on evaluation, based on something else." I was quiet, not surprised, just deciding whether the information changed anything. "Thank you for telling me." "You're not angry." "Being angry doesn't change the information does." Pause. "What will you do with it?" "Not sure yet, but I appreciate the call, genuinely." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and found Eleanor Marsh's email. Eleanor had been on Corway's board for 11 years. Direct, data-driven, not interested in feelings. What she was interested in, numbers that told the truth. I didn't write as someone wronged. I wrote as an analyst who'd identified material risk. Attached a 20-page document. No cover letter, just data. The Nortec supply chain team showed up at Delray uninvited. 4 people. Tuesday morning, 3-hour walkthrough. Team lead, Diana Forsyth. Handshake at the end. We'll be in touch by Friday. Wednesday, letter of intent for long-term regional anchoring. I signed that afternoon, took Sophie for tortellini that evening. Why are we celebrating, Mom? We're not celebrating. We're marking something. What's the difference? Celebrating is when something ends. Marking is when something begins. She ate her pasta, thinking about this. Meanwhile, Eleanor Marsh read my document. Twice. Pulled Corway's third quarter expansion projections, compared them with my cost analysis. The gap was real. $2.3 million annually between optimal partner and next best alternative. She called me. You sent me financial analysis with no return address and no indication what you want. I wanted someone to have correct data. What happens after isn't mine to decide. Pause. You realize this puts me in a difficult position. I know it gives you accurate information. What's difficult about that is separate. She called a board review. Voss wasn't consulted before notices went out. Then something I hadn't anticipated happened. Someone inside Corway started contacting journalists with claims that Delray had failed inspections and that I had a pattern of credential misrepresentation. Every claim was false, all traceable to an internal Corway authorization. 2 of my tenants received calls within 72 hours, quietly terminated their contracts. I lost both in a single week. I sat in my office that evening, didn't throw anything, didn't panic, just looked at the loading bay through the window. Systems I'd designed, floor I'd resurfaced, rail connector I'd repaired. I'd built this with my savings and 2 years of my life. I called Margaret. They're attacking the reputation now. How bad? Lost 2 tenants, publications running unchecked stories. Can you trace it? Richard can, that's why I'm calling him next. Richard Aldrin, my lawyer, listened without interrupting. Asked 3 questions, said he needed 48 hours. In 36 hours, he'd traced everything to an internal Corway authorization. Documented thoroughly. Called me. We have grounds for defamation, but that's not the play, is it? No, the play is the board meeting. Richard assembled the evidence for Eleanor. Daniel prepared a presentation, without clearing it with Voss. Worked on it over a weekend, corridor maps and cost analysis spread across his kitchen table. Board meeting morning. Voss sat at the conference table with the assurance of someone who'd managed rooms like this for 20 years. Standard review. He wasn't concerned. Eleanor opened the session, invited Daniel to present. Daniel walked through the scoring framework. Clean, methodical, showed comparative analysis, showed where Delray ranked, showed the $2.3 million annual cost differential. Then advanced to the second section. Timeline, communications campaign, vendor account, authorization trail. The decision to remove Delray, Daniel said, voice steady, wasn't based on performance, wasn't based on safety. Those claims circulating in press are unsupported by inspection records and originated from an internal authorization at this company. Pause. The cost? $2.3 million annually. Legal exposure. Mr. Aldrin can address if the board chooses. Silence. Eleanor looked down the table. Richard, is there anything you'd like to address? Voss straightened. The board doesn't run this company. I do. Eleanor looked at him. The board selects who runs this company and reviews that selection when presented with evidence of decision-making that exposes us to financial and legal risk. She turned to other members. I'd like to call a procedural pause. Richard Voss was placed on administrative suspension that afternoon. Processed quietly. Evidence made argument pointless. He left at 4:17 in the same suit he'd worn to the meeting. Nortec's contract with Delray finalized Monday. 3-year anchoring agreement with optional extensions. Press release mentioned Del Rey by name as anchor facility for Eastern. Corridor expansion. Within 10 days, 3 additional operators contacted me. 2 had declined me 18 months earlier. I returned every call same day. Didn't issue statements about Voss. Didn't talk to journalists. Had Richard send factual corrections to publications. Then went back to running my facility. Daniel resigned from Corway 6 weeks after the board session. Accepted without counteroffer. He emailed me professionally, letting me know he was available for consulting. Precise and brief. 1 sentence at the end took him longer to write than the rest. Said he was sorry he hadn't said something sooner. I replied within an hour. Said I appreciated it. Said I was expanding. Said he should visit when he had time. He came Thursday morning 6 months later, not as evaluator, just carried coffee in a folder. Sophie was there, school holiday, sitting in my office with toy trucks arranged in deliberate pattern, looked up when Daniel entered. "Are you bringing Mom coffee?" "And some numbers." She nodded. "Mom likes numbers." Went back to her trucks. I was at my desk, Phase 2 expansion drawings spread out. 4.2 additional acres, extended rail spur, temperature-controlled bay. Looked up when he came in, took the coffee. We stood side by side, looking at drawings. Phase 2 is bigger than the original. The original was proof of concept. This is the actual plan. He looked at the drawings. You had this plan when you signed the first contract. Yes. Just couldn't say it out loud yet. I looked at him. Didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. We worked through his folder for 2 hours. Cost projections, revenue modeling, corridor updates, risk scenarios. I listened, asked questions, made notes. Sophie appeared. "I'm hungry." Daniel mentioned a sandwich truck 2 blocks down. I said we should take a break. We walked in afternoon light. Me, Daniel, Sophie between us, asking the truck driver questions about the serving window mechanics. 8 standing on the sidewalk, conversation moving away from numbers into easier things. Walking back, Sophie took my hand, then reached up for Daniel's. He looked down. She was already looking elsewhere. He took her hand. We walked the last half block that way. Inside, I stood at my office window, overlooking the loading bay. Nortec trucks running afternoon cycle, arriving, loading, departing on schedule toward the eastern corridor, where construction equipment was already moving earth for highway expansion. Most of the industry hadn't incorporated into projections yet. I'd bought what nobody wanted, built it while everyone who said I was finished kept believing that. The trucks pulled out in clean succession. I watched until they reached the main road and turned east, carrying loads toward the corridor I'd been studying on a laptop screen in a dark apartment 2 years earlier when I had 4 months of savings left, and Sophie slept in the next room, and all I had to work with was a map and an idea everyone else thought wasn't worth the trouble. I watched the last truck clear the gate, then turned back to my drawings and went back to work.